Welcome to the DKO Noob-Proof God Guide for Thanatos, the Greek hand of death. I'll be going over his mechanics, his combos, and what he brings to a team. I'll also cover his abilities, talents, and provide tips you'll be able to apply in your next match. Feel free to skip to any part of this video that fits your needs. Roll the intro.
Thanatos.
Thanatos is great at securing knockouts. With powerful large abilities that heal, toss up, or deal heavy knockback, he's excellent at fighting and knocking out multiple enemies at once. However, these abilities come with a price, dealing a small amount of damage to Thanatos on use of any of his abilities. When the enemies are above a certain vulnerability threshold, your attacks and abilities are empowered against them, making him a terrifying god to fight while at high vulnerability. Ability number 1, Hovering Death. Thanatos rises into the air and hovers around, then dives down through the selected area, dealing damage before re-emerging for additional damage and heavy knockback. Thanatos gains super armor while diving into the ground until he re-emerges. This ability deals a small amount of damage to Thanatos on use, and it deals extra damage and knockback to enemies over 100% vulnerability. Ability number 2, Soul Leech. Thanatos summons an enlarged scythe to erupt at a target location, tossing up enemies towards him and dealing damage. Enemies that are hit release small healing orbs absorbed by Thanatos. This ability deals a small amount of damage to Thanatos on use, and it spawns extra orbs, deals extra damage, and deals extra knockback to enemies over 100% vulnerability. Ability number 3, On the Hunt. Thanatos swings his scythe in a wide arc in front of him, dealing damage and heavy knockback. This ability deals a small amount of damage to Thanatos on use, and it deals extra damage and knockback to enemies over 100% vulnerability. Ability number 4, the ultimate, Mortal Coil. Thanatos activates super armor and charges forward. Upon touching an enemy, he pulls them into the air and leeches vulnerability, dealing damage and a heavy knockback scythe swing. This ability deals a small amount of damage to Thanatos on use, and it deals extra damage and knockback to enemies over 100% vulnerability. Divine Traits, obtained through God Pass levels 0, 7, and 16. End of Fate. This trait rewards Thanatos for hitting abilities by reducing the ability's cooldown. This is great if enemies are distracted fighting other players, and it's good when in 1v1 scenarios where it's easier to capitalize on dodge baiting. Speed Demon. Thanatos moves faster while in proximity of someone above 100% vulnerability, making it easier to avoid abilities, close the gap, and bait attacks and dodges so you can follow up afterwards. This can be helpful in arcade mode where movement speed can get you to the fight and objectives faster. Blood Omen. This trait increases the damage Thanatos takes when casting abilities, but also increases ability damage by a considerable amount. This can be used to get enemies into his vulnerability threshold faster, but Thanatos will be easier to knock out. Minor Traits, obtained through God Pass levels 0, 1, 3, 9, and 14. Marked for Death. Deal additional damage to enemies above Thanatos' vulnerability threshold. This is useful for big stages where enemies are typically harder to knock out. It also helps against tanky characters like Hercules that require higher amounts of damage before being killable. Empowered Souls. Each orb collected from Soul Leech grants ultimate charge. This works well in modes where you can hit multiple enemies, like 3v3 arcade. Unyielding. Successive basic attacks against the same target increases the damage dealt. This talent makes it so you are rewarded for continuously attacking only one opponent, making it a must-have in the 1v1 mode. Hitting a different enemy with an attack will reset this bonus. Abilities do not count as attacks for this talent, meaning you can damage other enemies with abilities without removing the bonus, but your abilities themselves do not benefit from this talent. Cursed Scythe. Similar to Marked for Death, this talent makes On the Hunt deal extra damage against enemies above Thanatos' vulnerability threshold. In its current state, there are likely better options than this, as On the Hunt will already knock out pretty often above the threshold. However, there's certainly applications for this in arcade against tanky targets, or coupled with the minor trait Death is Nigh. Gaze from above. Thanatos can fly around in the air with hovering death for a short while longer, which is useful for waiting out abilities, staying out of reach above objectives, keeping the oddball away, or for flying further off the map to edgeguard. Death is nigh. This decreases Thanatos' vulnerability threshold, which boosts his attacks and abilities against enemies above the threshold. This affects a vast amount of Thanatos' kit and talents. Couple this with other talents that activate above the threshold for a greater impact. Essence of Vigor. Thanatos' ultimate ability, Mortal Coil, heals him for an additional amount. This is useful for long duration matches like Arcade. Greater Blessing, obtained through God Pass level 15. Thanatos' Favor. Knocking out an enemy provides a temporary damage buff. This is useless in 1v1s and may be difficult to find value with in 2v2s, however this buff is powerful in Arcade. Lesser Blessings, obtained through God Pass levels 5 and 12. Weakness in numbers. Attacks deal additional damage while outnumbered within a short range around the player. This is useless in 1v1 but may be valuable in 2v2 in Arcade. Healthy Spirit. Vulnerability restoring effects heal for additional vulnerability. Soul Leech and Mortal Coil both heal vulnerability, thus benefiting from this talent. The additional healing will also help mitigate the damage done to Thanatos upon casting abilities. Tip number 1. Stalling. Hovering Death keeps Thanatos suspended in the air for quite a while, allowing him to completely avoid certain ultimates or wait for stealths and lingering abilities to end. It can also be used to hover above objectives while still being within them, such as the Coin Blitz Bank, safely contributing to the team. Tip number 2. Soul Leech combos. Hitting Soul Leech sends the enemy directly to you, unable to move or dodge for a short duration. If the enemy hit by Soul Leech is in your vulnerability threshold, following up with a jump, light aerial, heavy aerial is a good option for a knockout. Hold heavy will not connect if the enemy is matching dodge. If the enemy is not within the threshold, follow up with a light attack chain instead to get them there. Tip number 3. On the Hunt. This ability is unique, capable of being casted while moving in any direction, but will always attack in the direction the camera is facing. You can safely cast this at enemies while walking away from them. This makes On the Hunt a good keep away tool for enemies who are charging at you. Tip number 4. Mortal Coil. This ultimate ability does a lot for Thanatos. Not only does it deal a lot of damage to the target hit, it also heals Thanatos a significant amount, which can drastically reduce the vulnerability difference in your favor. It also has a heavy knockback, powerful enough that if an enemy enters your vulnerability threshold after leeching, it will likely knock them out. Use this on enemies within 25% of your vulnerability threshold for the most efficient usage. Tip number 5. Edgeguarding. Soul Leech is a great edgeguarding tool. It has a high vertical hitbox and tosses up enemies to you. Try casting it far enough away from the ledge so you can't be punished for missing. On the Hunt can hit further off stage than Soul Leech and offer more mobility for edgeguarding. And finally, Thanatos can fly far off stage with Hovering Death to fight enemies as they try to recover by canceling the ability off stage. This is somewhat risky, however, and may require practice to nail down. Tip number 6. KS means kill secured. Thanatos is a menace against high vulnerability enemies. Try to prioritize them as they will likely be easy knockouts. I hope this video proved useful and that you'll be able to apply what you learned in your next match. If you enjoyed the content, let us know in the comments below. You can also follow me on Twitter or join the Cabbage Corp Discord in the description below, where we share Smite knowledge and cabbages. Thanks for watching and see you all on the battleground.